If you've been following U.S. politics, especially lately, you've probably felt some serious whiplash.
Oh, definitely.
One administration gets in and boom, they immediately start reversing everything the last one did. Then the next one comes along and flips the whole policy pancake right back over again.
It's a constant swing.
Yeah, really intense swing. And it's not just about regulations. It feels like it's about the fundamental direction of the country. I mean, think about the January 6th Capitol incident. The shockwaves from that. It showed a split, a fissure. That seems way deeper than just, normal political disagreement.
Exactly. And what we're seeing, it isn't just your typical policy back and forth. This really intense, almost personalized partisan strife, what our sources are calling Dengjing.
It seems to be rooted in something, well, structural.
Historical.
Okay, structural and historical. So that's what we're diving into today.
That's the plan. We're looking at sources arguing that this instability is maybe inherent in the American system itself. And it's because of a factor we honestly rarely talk about: the sheer scale of the state, the size, the population, and the political traditions it was actually built on.
Okay, scale. That's interesting. Our sources kick this off with a pretty fascinating bit of history, right, involving Deng Xiaoping.
Yeah, back in the 1980s, at a time when a lot of U.S. thinkers were criticizing China for policy instability, Deng had this, well, frankly, blunt counter-argument. Almost paradoxical.
What did he say?
He argued that actually policy in China was relatively stable. He observed that it was the United States that suffered from this built-in instability.
Why? What was his reasoning?
Because major policy shifts, that whole flipping the pancake thing we mentioned, seem to follow every single election cycle. Presidential, midterms, you name it.
Huh.
The argument is the system's design basically forces policy to be constantly up for grabs, constantly reversible.
Okay, so let's unpack that. This idea that the scale, the size and population of a country is this huge, often overlooked factor in how politics works.
Right. We kind of have to start small to get it. Conflict, disagreement. It's just the natural state when you have small groups of humans.
Like what?
Well, think about trying to decide where a big family eats dinner. Or the politics inside a college dorm room, right? Intense.
Yeah, definitely.
If you don't have some kind of strong, neutral, central authority figure, factions just inevitably form and square off. That's just the basic political dynamic in small settings.
And this connects to the Western political tradition. How? Because the sources say that tradition is rooted in that small-scale model.
Entirely. Think about the ancient Greek city-states. These were polities of, what, a few tens of thousands of people?
Max?
Tiny by today's standards.
Exactly. Plato even theorized the ideal number of citizens for a state was precisely 5,040.
Wow, specific. Why that number?
It wasn't random. Plato thought that for citizens to actually participate directly, to know each other, for the whole system to run on rhetoric and, moral philosophy in the public square, it had to be small enough to gather. It's basically township politics, as the sources put it.
That's a good way to think about it. Township politics on a slightly larger scale.
But, okay, if everyone's down in the public square arguing constantly, what are the downsides? What are the side effects of all that intense, close-quarters rivalry?
Well, it creates what the sources call a hotbed for partisan strife.
Sounds messy.
History shows it was often lethal. In those small, ancient republics, politics wasn't just about winning an argument or an election. It felt existential.
Existential how?
You see these tribal feuds, family feuds, escalating into just brutal civil wars. Assassinations were common, physically eliminating your rivals. That was on the table. The goal wasn't just to get them out of office, it was often to get them out of existence.
That's sobering. And that violent history, that shaped how the U.S. founders were thinking. They knew about this danger.
Oh, absolutely. They were steeped in this history. Plato called factionalism the greatest disaster for a republic. Machiavelli famously warned that these small republics are basically doomed to swing back and forth between servitude and license.
Meaning tyranny and anarchy.
Exactly. Servitude under a strong man, or the chaos of license where no one's in charge. They knew the risks inside out.
So when the U.S. was founded, they had this dilemma. They had, nearly 3 million people?
Which was massive for a republic back then. Unprecedented, really.
So how do you govern at that scale without immediately falling into those factional traps, or just giving up and installing a king?
And that's where James Madison steps in with his his famous prescription, his big country theory.
Right. Explain that. What was the idea?
Madison argued that the sheer size, the scale, would actually be the solution, not the problem.
How?
He figured a massive republic would naturally include so many different parties, interests, religious sects, just countless factions, that they would essentially check each other. They'd cancel each other out, was the thinking.
Making it impossible for any single faction to dominate the whole country.
That was the hope, to protect liberty and stability through diversity and scale.
But it sounds like that benefit got undermined almost immediately.
It did, yeah. For a couple of key reasons. First, the U.S. wasn't really created as this single, unified state based on some grand, rational design.
It was more cobbled together.
Exactly. It was a piecing together of 13 pretty separate colonial entities.
Yeah.
What resulted was a loose federation, not a tight union. It lacked that strong central authority that could truly stand above all the local squabbles. Our sources call it an unfinished product of a unified state.
Okay, so a weak center.
Yep.
And then the way representation was set up,
Mm-hmm.
the electoral system itself made things worse.
You could argue that because the system is based on representatives elected from specific districts.
Right, your local congressperson.
Yeah. Their primary job, their first loyalty, is to their district's interests, not necessarily the national collective good. It transmits local interests upwards.
Which leads to...
Well, the philosopher Hobbes sort of hinted at this. He thought Parliament, the legislative body, is the place most prone to partisan strife, because it just becomes this endless process of compromise, collision, and deal-making between hundreds of distinct local interests.
Not a unified search for what's best for everyone.
Much less so, yeah. It's inherently fragmented.
And then Madison's big idea about factions canceling each other out that got completely torpedoed once national political parties actually formed, didn't it? Even though Washington specifically warned against them.
Exactly. Washington saw the danger. But once those thousands of little local factions started organizing themselves into two massive competing national parties,
The benefit of scale just vanished.
poof. Instead of countless tiny factions keeping each other in check, you just ended up pouring all that energy, all that local rivalry into two giant organized national camps.
So local squabbles became organized national dangjing.
That's the transformation, yeah.
Okay, let's jump way forward. Fast forward to today. Scale isn't 3 million anymore, it's over 330 million.
Right. Huge difference.
And now you throw in things like social media, 247 cable news. It feels like pouring gasoline on that fire you described.
It absolutely accelerates everything. And the polarization isn't just, speeding up. It feels like it's becoming existential.
How so?
Well, you're seeing topics that used to be absolutely fringe, like openly discussing the possibility of another U.S. Civil War or a national split now being debated by serious academics, even retired, high-ranking military figures. That's a major shift in the conversation.
And the sources argue the temperature is rising because the fight isn't just about what policies to pass anymore.
Exactly. It's becoming a fight over the rules of the game itself.
Okay, explain that.
When one side starts to feel like the rules are fundamentally rigged against them, their instinct is to try and change those rules. Then the other side feels like they have to defend the existing rules or change them back or change other rules to compensate.
And we see this playing out with voting rights, for example.
Definitely. You've got, 25 or so blue states pushing to expand things like early voting, mail-in ballots, no ID voting.
But at the same time.
You have maybe 15 red states moving in the opposite direction, passing more restrictive measures, tightening ID laws, limiting drop boxes. It's a direct conflict over the basic mechanics of voting.
And it goes beyond voting rules, too, right? Procedural weapons.
Yeah, things like the constant threats to get rid of the filibuster in the Senate or the way gerrymandering is used.
Where they draw district lines to basically guarantee outcomes?
Right. Parties literally drawing maps to ensure their side wins seats, sometimes even when they get fewer votes statewide.
Yeah.
When you lose faith that the process is fair, the whole system starts to seize up. It enters this state of what the sources call political disability, paralysis.
Political disability. That really captures that feeling of dysfunction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Where it seems like nothing important can get done.
Because every single action, every potential policy gets filtered through this lens of, how does this help us win the next election? How does this hurt the other side?
Not, is this actually good for the country long term?
That often seems secondary, if it's considered at all. It kind of reminds you of that movie Don't Look Up.
Oh, yeah, with the comet.
Exactly. You've got this existential threat barreling down, but the political actors are mostly obsessed with their polling numbers and managing the news cycle. The immediate political gain overshadows the massive collective problem.
So the system lacks a way to focus on the collective good when things get this polarized?
Well, the U.S. system was designed to limit central authority, right, to encourage competition. But maybe it needs some mechanism for collective action in a crisis. Our sources bring up an interesting historical contrast.
What's that?
Li Hongzhang, in the late Qing dynasty in China, he was this powerful official tasked with basically trying to hold the crumbling dynasty together. He called himself the dynasty's repairman.
A repairman for the state.
Yeah. Now, whether he was effective is debatable, but the point is he represented a figure who was supposed to be acting for the collective survival, trying to patch things up, stand above the fray, at least in theory.
And the U.S. system.
By design, it favors competition over that kind of centralized, nonpartisan repair function. It doesn't really have an equivalent figure or institution when the core divisions run so deep.
Okay, let's circle back to where we started, that flipping the pancake effect.
Yeah.
The constant policy instability.
Right. That instability, the sources argue, has a deep structural cause related to elite interests.
Also.
Two-party systems historically tend to be most stable when the underlying economic elites, the capital class, whatever you want to call them, are relatively unified in their basic interests.
Okay.
But when those elite interests fundamentally diverge, the classic example being the North versus the South before the Civil War, with completely different economic systems and goals,
that conflict tears the political system apart.
it manifests as much deeper, much more intractable, even violent partisan strife. The economic split makes the political compromise impossible.
And so those policy swings we see today, combined with these short, frequent election cycles, it just means nothing sticks.
That's the core of Deng Xiaoping's critique we mentioned earlier. That lack of stability forces American leaders into this constant short-term focus.
Always thinking about the next election.
Always. We read these accounts like Bill Clinton allegedly having to spend time every day focused just on fundraising, pulling in hundreds of thousands of dollars constantly just to keep the campaign machine fueled.
So every president becomes a permanent campaigner, not a long-term planner.
Pretty much. And it also creates that lame duck problem.
Ah, right. Where the president loses power before their term is even over.
Exactly. If their party loses control of Congress in the midterm elections, their influence plummets, often with 2 full years left. Even people within their own administration might start looking past them, thinking about the next administration.
So for big chunks of their elected term, they're effectively disabled from doing anything major.
It severely limits their ability to act decisively or implement long-term strategies.
And compounding all this is the language being used now. The rhetoric seems off the charts.
It's gone far beyond just policy disagreement. When you have a sitting president, like Biden did, marching the Capitol riot anniversary, accusing his predecessor of holding a dagger at the throat of democracy.
Yeah, that's strong language.
The sources note that kind of rhetoric signifies a complete breakdown of civility. The mask is off, basically. It signals an existential struggle for power, not just a policy debate.
Okay, so if the system is, as the sources suggest, almost designed for this chronic strife, and it's getting worse, what does this actually mean for the average person listening to us right now? Why do so many people feel so disconnected from it all?
Well, first, there's the disillusionment because, for many, their individual vote doesn't feel like it really counts.
Okay.
Presidential election turnout is often surprisingly low in the U.S., frequently below 55%. Part of that is the winner-take-all system in most states.
Meaning, if you're in a state that reliably votes for the other party.
Right. If you're a Republican in California or a Democrat in, say, Utah, your vote for president feels almost symbolic. It's not going to change the statewide outcome. That definitely removes some incentive to participate.
And that political disability we talked about, the gridlock and inability to get things done, that translates into just poor government performance, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It means low administrative efficiency. You see it in things like sometimes chaotic responses to natural disasters, these constant fights over the debt ceiling that threaten the economy, the failure to pass major infrastructure overhauls or healthcare reforms that many agree are needed.
And so people suffer the consequences of this dysfunction.
They do. But there's also a really powerful cultural factor at play here.
Which is?
The sources argue that the American political culture has been incredibly successful at convincing the public of that famous Churchill line that democracy is the worst system of government except for all the others.
So people just accept the flaws. They have low expectations.
To a degree, yes. The idea of limited government is so deeply embedded culturally. People often don't demand higher standards of administrative efficiency or long-term planning from their government, maybe because they don't believe it's possible or even desirable.
Even when it directly affects them, like with high inflation or housing costs or social problems.
And then it's like a powerful, self-limiting belief about what government can or should do. It keeps expectations relatively low, even in the face of significant problems.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up.
Yeah.
To summarize this deep dive, this constant, intense partisan strife, this ying, it's like a persistent political chronic disease.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And it's being aggressively aggravated because the system was fundamentally designed based on the logic of small-scale city-states, designed almost to thrive on competition, but is struggling massively to cope with the sheer scale and complexity of a modern nation, with incredibly diverse and often fundamentally conflicting interests.
Well said. And this internal disorder in the U.S. isn't just an American problem, is it? Given U.S. influence, it becomes a global risk.
Right. And while there's a clear strategy being deployed domestically right now, trying to create unity by focusing on an external adversary, specifically building an anti-China consensus.
The sources we looked at are pretty skeptical that this will work long-term. They argue the internal contradictions, the foundational issues we've been discussing, are just too deep to be papered over by pointing at an external false target. The problems are baked into the system.
Which leaves us with a really critical final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
Yeah, think about this. The U.S. system was intentionally designed, back in the 18th century, to limit central authority. It was built on that small state logic of competition, checks, and balances.
Built for a much simpler, smaller world.
Exactly. So, given the incredible pressures it's under, now the escalating political hatred, the speed of technological and social change, the sheer scale of the country in the 21st century, the question is, how long can that original 18th century design actually withstand this mounting strain? Can a system built for limitation handle the demands of modern hyperpartisanship and scale?
A fascinating and, frankly, pretty unsettling question to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.